All right. I see both in my portion of it. Y'all see me there?
Okay. I do not. I'm not seeing you, unfortunately.
Huh. Wow. Is it so?
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. I can disable reactions. All right. Whatever. Okay. So let's get started. So I'm here. I'm Hans. I'm here to talk about online privacy, security, password management, basically using a password manager well beyond what they were designed for. Normally, so I'm Michigan User Group. Y'all should know that. You're here, right? Normally, I skip over the date because, again, you know that you're already here. However, this is the only presentation I'm giving during the holy month of 2112. So I had to bring in a nice rush thing to put in there. I was actually going to put a graphic in the presentation, but as y'all were discussing, this Java thing hit, and I have been doing nothing but that for the last 4 or 5 days. Places to get a hold of me. As I said before the meeting, I'm hiring. Let me know if you're interested. And as I say, part of it with that is we actually had people promote up out of the group. It was the reason we have the opening. So that's I think that's a good sign, right? Luckily, I was able to make a quick edit and translate this slide back to English for you. I think I got all of them. It was in German. So my next presentation that I've got scheduled right now is for GeekBeacon Fest in February. That was supposed to be in November, and they had to move it. I think y'all know that because I'm pretty certain they work with Penguicon. There's a little bit of cross pollination between the groups, and then always I don't actually update my talks page very much, but it's there. The QR code is for the link. All right. Now, starting the presentation, the first thing is I am not a lawyer, right? And very specifically, I'm not your lawyer. So if you need to review legal advice based on anything I say tonight, or any other time in my life, really, especially anything I say tonight, please talk to your own lawyer, right? Or lawyers, however you're going to do that, right? I don't think I'm doing anything that's horrible, but, some of these things might be a little questionable. All right. So why do we need security? Well, Log4j, right? Is it right now? But Spectre Meltdown, for those of you that remember that. But Equifax, the Gen 2 GitHub got in. Heartbleed, for those of you who remember that. The 3 times that LinkedIn has been broken into and subsequently, eventually, finally, maybe sort of got decent security on their passwords, because the first time they got broken into, they had clear text passwords. Yahoo, one of the break-ins there, they had acquisition a company that had clear text passwords. So, who knows, right? So we need to take control of our own security to the extent we can. And there are things that we can do to have better security for our accounts by isolating them and making sure that that you can't cross over. Now, I've got a couple of names here. Jennifer Lawrence, Kate Upton, Rihanna. They're famous enough, even I've heard of them, right? Matt Honan, you might not be familiar with. He is a journalist and used to work for Wired Magazine. And while he was working there, a couple of people decided to break into his Twitter account because he had a short Twitter handle. And they just thought it would be fun to post a bunch of BS from his short Twitter handle. So in order to do that, though, they broke into his Apple account, into his Google account, into a whole bunch of other accounts along the way in order to get there. But when they broke in, he thought about it, and he's like, once they had access to his email accounts, they could have then used his email to go phishing all of his friends, right? And all the contacts that he have and going after everybody else. So they could have leveraged him in order to go after other people that in his circles. But the bigger cost for him was they had initially gone in just to go through and steal his account and post whatever propaganda they wanted to post, right? But while they were doing it, one of them was like, hey, I can delete all of his data, and did so. So he went in on the Apple account and set it up to destroy all of Matt's data. And because the way Apple had things set up, and he was using, I guess, the default setup or whatever, it went through to delete it on all of his Apple devices. So he was their household was purely Apple for stuff at that point, I guess. And so it was deleting from his laptops, from the phones, everything. He figured it out and was able to turn one of them off before everything was gone. And because he was a journalist for Wired, he got extra handling, special handling from Apple and Google, and was able to recover his data in the end. But he could have lost all of the photos that he had of his daughter up until that point in time. Gone, right? Because he did not have any other backups of it. So that is the cost for it. Yeah, you lose all your money and your friends get fished and that stuff. That's pretty bad. But losing things that really have a meaning to you personally, whether that be family or whatever, the trip you took to Barbados or whatever, right? That's also important. So they can not just exfiltrate your data, but they can also delete your data if they get the right access. So to me, that's part of what we're talking about is at stake. Now, I was giving this presentation at Ohio Linux Fest right before the pandemic. So the last one before the pandemic started a couple of years ago. And I was listening to a Freakonomics podcast about education, actually. But in there, the person they were interviewing said that 90% of the data ever collected by humans had been collected in the previous 2 years. Right? Because of all the stuff that we're getting from our phones and from our cars and our printers and whatever else is spying on us, right? Our little puffies. Okay, this one's not sending any data back. He's a good security guy. But all these things are collecting data on us and putting that in there. Of course, the walled garden social medias and things like that, right? So when we talk about what data are we exposing, really everything, because everything's coming up the last couple of years. So if your account has data that you want to be secure, you want to make sure that a break-in at one place can't be used to break in somewhere else. All right. So first thing off, use only trusted software sources. That's easy for us for Linux, right? We've got distributions. You can get your software from your distributions. Don't just grab them from some random Russian or Greek or whatever site you want to get to, right? Some random.net. Go through and make sure you're getting it from the distributions or from sources you trust. And of course, install your security updates. whatever you're doing, go ahead and make sure you get your security updates and make sure your systems are secure. All right. So I want to give an example of what encryption is. So this is a pepper and carrot postcard. For those of you who can see the small, tiny thing over here, right? And as a postcard, this is unencrypted. If I send this through the mail as it is, I put the sender information on the back. Then we can, I'll get to that, Harold, in a second. We can, anybody that's in the postal system can read that. So if you think about sending data across the internet, anybody that's got a router where I send the digital equivalent of postcard can see what's in there. They can see who I'm sending it to, who it's coming from. They can also see the content of it. Now I can go through and put that in a encrypted envelope, and so that you can't see that. And now let's say that this is encrypted. Now, for those of you that were here for my SSH presentation a couple months ago, you know this is the point in the presentation where I handed over the net to Craig if I'd let him know ahead of time we were doing this. Well, I didn't, so we're going to go there. But note, it's probably upside down. I switched cards. By the way, both of these are from David Ravoy, Pepper and Carrots. This is the most recent kind of public painting he did. And he has a new episode of Pepper and Carrot coming out tomorrow. So we're getting news right here as we go. But that's kind of the idea behind encrypted, is that it can't be viewed while it's being transporting from one place to another place. Or if it's encrypted on your hard drive and only you have the key for it, somebody else can't get to it and grab that data. We can't trust that companies are encrypting our data properly. They should be nowadays, but we can't trust it. And we want to make sure that even if they are encrypting it, somebody can't grab our credentials and use our credentials in order to get to that data. All right. So when should we use encryption? All the time, every time. HTTPS Everywhere is a great add-on from the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation. We don't need it so much anymore because Mozilla is slowly adding, or not slowly, they're adding all the features that HTTPS Everywhere has, so that by default, we choose an HTTPS connection. So at the beginning, Craig pointed out that http://mug.org is the website for you. I don't know off the top of my head if you have a SSL certificate for the site as well. What HTTPS Everywhere would do is say, hey, let's try that. And if it works, we'll use that instead of using the unsecure connection. And as I say, Firefox is adding those types of features and keeping it to where you're not getting content that's partially secure and partially not secure as we go. So that is awesome. And when I say every time, everywhere, I also mean on your local network, especially if you happen to be using a Wi-Fi router in there. Another thing came out last night in Germany about how Wi-Fi routers are not secure and people are they can use Bluetooth to grab all your data off of it. Embedded devices aren't secure. They don't stay secure. Use encryption every time you can. Go back in time and watch my SSH presentation if you want more about that. But let's talk about what we can do with the password manager. All right. So what should you encrypt? Your login credentials, right? The things that you use to authenticate who you are, any personally identifying information, or anything that you find is important. So your private photos that you don't want other people to see without your permission, your medical information, your shoe size, if that's really important for you. For Monty Python fans, it should be. All right. Then what is password bleed over? Password bleed over is where, and it's really credential bleed over, where the credentials for one site can be used to log into another site. So if you had been using the same credentials for LinkedIn as you use for Facebook, 3 times somebody would have been able to grab your LinkedIn credentials and use those to log into Facebook. Or if you're using them for your bank, they would be able to go take your data, because it doesn't take very long to go try all the banks on the planet, right? So you want to make sure that the credentials you use for every site is unique so that they cannot be reused on a different site. So use different passwords, and I'll get to more than passwords in a second. All right. Credentialed access, I'm using the word credentials. So those are basically just the tokens that are used to identify you as you. We think of them as username and password, right? But they can be other things. We'll get to some of what the other tokens are as well. All right. So, for instance, how do you prove you are you? That's the tokens I'm talking about. So username, often an email address nowadays. Hold on a second. It's time for a costume change. I got complaints that for the in-person presentations, I wear a lot of different Penguin gear. So I'm trying to stock up on my catch up my game on online presentations as well. So your username, what is your email? Like I said, it could be your email address, your password, security questions. So this is one of the ways they got into Matt's account, is they were able to figure out how to go through and social engineer his security questions in order to answer those, right? PIN. If you use a PIN for an account for your credit card or something like that, that's also credential. Multifactor authentication. There's a lot more of that today. And then body parts. You can use fingerprints, eye prints. I don't know if they do elbow prints, but whatever it is that they're using nowadays for body parts, those can be used as well. Voice authentication for fans of certain movies, right? But I'm talking about passwords, not passports. So unique. Every one of those items that are used for credentials should be unique for every site. So not just the password, but also the username, the email address. Also your security answers and questions, right? There are some restrictions because there's some things you can't do, and I'll get to some of that. But let me get into some details. So again, terms I'm going to use. So first of all, random string. So random string is just a random sequence of text gibberish. Doesn't need to make sense. It might make sense. We'll get to some conditions for that. But just random stuff. I got an example there at the bottom. One of the keys for that to make it more secure is to use lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers, use punctuation where you can. Sorry, multiple languages there. Use punctuation where you can, and use many different combinations as you can do that. Do be cautious of similar looking characters. So, I at this point, my eyes are not working as well as they used to. And so the difference between an L and a 1 becomes harder for me to read if I'm typing it in. If you're doing what I suggest with a password manager, it doesn't matter because you never see your password. We'll get there. Also be careful of underline and dash, and just like everywhere else in the web, spaces and tabs are interchangeable and that you can't tell the difference. So be cautious of using those. And I mentioned punctuation. This came across on Mastodon a couple weeks ago. I thought it was awesome. Add commas and unnecessary apostrophes to your passwords to mess with CSV files. So yeah, you can use apostrophes, double quotes, see what happens, right? All right, random word salad is similar to random string, but instead of being individual letters, it's different words. And one of the keys
is that really a good idea with the commas or no?
I don't know if it makes a difference, but you know, let me go back to that. I was going to make a comment. I decided not to, but since you asked, I want to do this. One would hope that one would think, I guess not necessarily hope, but one would think that the people who are good enough to break into a site are smart enough to sanitize their data. And so the commas and stuff doesn't matter. But, you know, not necessarily. And of course, the people they sell it to might not be smart enough to do that as well. So, you know, I think I'm going to, when I add punctuation, I'm going to consider more commas and quotes in my stuff. I already use backslashes just for fun, right? And I'll get to that comic later. I don't read somebody else's comics during my presentations because I'll get distracted. So, all right. So random word salad. So random word salad is similar to random strings, but instead of being individual characters that are different, you want words. But the key is they can't make a normal sentence, right? See dog run or whatever, things like that. You don't want something that somebody can guess. It's not your favorite lyric. It's not a line from a poem. It's not the opening of a movie. You know, all those things end up in engines that are used to go through and crack passwords. And so that is a poor choice because you're actually limiting it down to something else. It's better to have unassociated words. Now, when you do that, though, I do this all the time, and I choose words that aren't associated. But after a period of time, if I am using it, needing to type it in a lot, I end up creating an association, right? So we'll get to my example in a second. And I'll see if I can create because I've never thought about it, an association with that. Now, the longer and more random are both better, just like random strings. So more words is good. Although at some point, especially if you have to type this in, you get to where you don't want to type in the entirety of War and Peace to log in, right? Use multiple languages as you can, though. So if you speak multiple languages, or at least enough words, you know, hasta la vista or whatever, know a few words from a language other than English, throw those in there. Vista is not so great because Vista is an English word, but hasta, I have, you know, if I'd have to look up how to spell it myself. So that's probably a decent word to throw in there. So throw in from other languages if you can. Use declination and conjugation, etc. So if you speak a language where the words change depending on where you use them in a sentence, use forms of the words that don't show up in the dictionary, right? That don't show up in common use or is common in use. That'll help as well. Add mid-word couple letters. So the default most people do is they capitalize the first letter in the word. Instead of capitalizing the first letter, capitalize the last letter in the word, or capitalize the second letter in the word, or capitalize the one in the middle, whatever works for you. But throw those capitals in, but not at the place where all the algorithms are expecting them. Doesn't mean they can't figure it out, but you're making it to where they have to go further into their searches in order to get to yours, right? You're not trying to make it, you can't make it impossible for them to guess your password. You're just trying to make it hard enough that it takes too long to be worthwhile, right? Use randomish punctuation between the words. So that's the place to add the commas and quotes and stuff like that. And then here's an example that I just came up with when I was writing the presentation one night. Purplish leche verfährt singing liberté. So I'm using 3-4 different languages there. Purplish is purple, but it's not I don't even know if purplish is a word, but it works for me, right? Leche is Spanish for milk, one of the few words I know. Verfährt is to drive wrong in German. Singing, and then liberté is the French spelling for liberty without the thing over the E, right? So I don't know, Grimace driving around town and getting lost while singing about liberty. There we go. I got purple milk, or driving around drinking his milk. There we go. I've got all the things in there. I've now got an image that will help me remember those 7 words. Okay. And then the canonical example is correct battery horse staple from XKCD. I can go look at that yourself. I think it shows up in a bit, but I won't give you time to read it. Now you're thinking, Hans, that's a lot to remember. I got to remember these things for every site I go to, and I need different information for every single site and stuff like that. That's just way too much. Yes, it is. The human brain can do that, but we've got better things to do with our brain. So we need something else that'll help us with that, and that's where I recommend password managers. Now, password managers are a way to securely store credentialed information. Ooh, it's getting hot under the lights. Credentialed information, and they're easy to use for authentication. It's not just that we can store our information in there, but we can use it. Because if you put it in a vault, and then it takes you 20 minutes to go get a password every time you need to use one, that's not useful. We need something that you can readily use, but still be fairly secure. So that's, as I say, password managers. All right. So what I see and recommend as requirements for password managers. First thing, of course, free software. Everybody knows me, would know that regardless of what the thing is. But for security applications, I think that's extra important, right? Because unless it's getting audit and independent audits and audits without permission, right? If it's got independent audits, but they paid the people who do the audits, we can't really trust that was taken care of. So I want to have to where anybody can go audit the code. So it needs to be free software, and not just that they can see, not just open core where they can see the software, but actually where we can make changes and we can do things with it. So it needs to be free software, the whole thing. When we got passwords in the application, they're hidden when you're viewing them. So you get stars instead of asterisks instead of Hunter2 for those that get that reference. Locally encrypted, operating system independent. So it's encrypted on your system, not if you're using a cloud tool, that's fine. But you want it encrypted on your local system, and preferably in a way that's operating system independent. So if it's web based, then anything with a decent web browser can work. But for the thing I use local files. But there's a standard for them, so I can move those from one system to another. I can move them off my laptop onto my phone and still access the password files. Data liberation is about getting your data out. So what happens if the tool I'm using stops being supported, or it turns out there's a huge security hole in it and I need to stop using it, or I just decide to try something else. I want to be able to copy my data back out of there without having to copy and paste every single entry. I use a couple hundred passwords a day. Easily, every day. So I definitely have way more than I want to copy paste one at a time from in there, much less, for the entire entry, much less each individual part of an entry one at a time. I don't want to do that. So I want to make sure that I can get it back out. The tool I use allows me to throw it into JSON, which I'm getting decent at. So, that's not so bad. But it can then be imported into another tool. We need automatic clipboard entry clearing, or not going into the clipboard at all. And there's some tools that do that. And admittedly, I don't know enough. I was trying to do some homework for this presentation, and I didn't get there. But the tool I'm recommending does some autofill that I don't use. But based on what I understand, it then bypasses the clipboard altogether. So the data is never even in there. But password managers nowadays will go through, and if you've copied it into the clipboard, it will set it to expire. The default is usually 60 or 120 seconds or something like that, and that's configurable. Easy copy pasta. You want to be able to copy and paste it from your password manager into the application where you're trying to use it. And you need a configurable password manager. Part of that is different sites allow different things. So some of them require that it be 8 characters but not longer than 20, or require that it be 15 but not longer than 30. They require it to have special characters. They don't allow it to have special characters. So you need to be able to configure the password generator to do what it is you want to have for that particular piece. I find you need notes, if nothing else, to keep track of what the site was requiring when you did it, because they don't all tell you, but you might have to figure it out by trial and error. And then you could organize the entries. So you don't just have a random thing of file of passwords, but you can actually organize them and say, these are the banking websites, these are my social media websites, or these are the things I need to help grandma, or these are the things I use for whatever, right? So you can organize them in whatever way makes sense to you. Okay, interesting. I'll read that later on. So then, to me, bonus features for a password manager, these are things that aren't absolutely necessary, but I think are really good features and ideally would be in there. Human readable password generation. So this is the random word, right? Random word salad type of thing I was talking about. But not even just that, but it's also being able to do a random string that you can kind of read. And I'll get to an example of that. Then you also have, they can do the diceware, the random word salad generation. That will give you a pronunciation guide for the human readable part if you've got that. They can do random string generation from anywhere in the UI, not just the password fields. That is so important for me, and you'll see why as we get there. You can do secondary key value storage. This is important for being able to do your security questions and answers and things like that. And being able to copy paste out of that, again, just for ease of use, right? Making it easy. Data export with sync, and this is a thing I do. So I don't need all of my passwords on my phone. All I need is a subset. I don't need maybe a half dozen passwords on my phone, really, right? When I travel, I need to add another 5 or 10. So I've got the information for the airline, if it should ever be safe to get in a metal tube again, right? For the hotel, for whatever else I might be using for that I might need to access my account while I'm gone. So I have those. If I'm going on a long trip, I might have stuff for a half dozen hotels over the course of the trip, right? Or multiple airlines and so forth. So ideally, what I can do is say these things get exported to my phone version of the password by database, and then next time I can say I don't need these travel things anymore. Take those out, and I again export a normal copy. Or if I'm changing, if I'm going on another trip again, I can just change it instead of having to do it by hand. What I do right now is I do it by hand. It'd be nice if I had an easy export script that I could use. Sites safety verifications. Now this is, I will, in this presentation, I'm trying to be nice about it. But in normal life, I will say not, I will not give much credence to web-based password managers for my personal use. For teams, where you're working, you got multiple people in an employment company or in a company, it makes a little bit more sense. But one of the things that LastPass that came up in the chat, the LastPass was the one that did it. So when Heartbleed came out, LastPass added a check to go through and check to see if a site was susceptible to Heartbleed, and they also had at the time they said a way to go through and log into all your sites and change the passwords for you. So I have to admit that's a pretty cool feature, right? If I were to have to go change the passwords on all the sites that I use, it's like 1,000 or 1,500 sites, right? So I have to admit that's a pretty cool feature that my stuff does not have, and that likely is really only available in a commercial vendor. We'll talk about one that we can talk to about getting that if they don't have it already. All right, my recommendations: KeePass XC or KeePass X if that is not available for you. KeePass X was the Unix port of the KeePass free software password manager. KeePass is for Windows, and somebody went through and created, and rather than doing it in .NET, they went through and wrote it again from scratch. Essentially, thank goodness for that. I have been using that KeePass now for 15 years or something like that. And then a few years ago, KeePass XC kind of forked out as XC being the community edition, where you got more people working on it and you're getting faster updates and they're doing a lot of stuff. As far as I know, and please don't tell me otherwise, because I want to keep this vision in my head. But no, when I've looked at it and stuff, as far as I know, the KeePass X and the KeePass XC groups get along, and it was all friendly about it. But KeePass XC has had a lot of changes that came through that I have not seen in KeePass X. So I recommend that as the version. If you are wanting to do a web-based system, then Bitwarden and Nextcloud are some free software options. Now, Bitwarden, I think, is open core as opposed to completely open source, because I went and looked at their licensing, and there's some stuff about giving you a one-time permission to use their commercial software or something like that. So I'm a little bit leery about it. But they do a lot of community stuff. They also sponsor some of the podcasts that we listen to over at Jupiter and Destination Linux and so forth, and a lot of conferences. So they're being active in the community, and they're at least mostly free software. Nextcloud is completely free software. AGPL is a requirement for Nextcloud, and they have, last I looked, at least 3 different password managers that are available as apps that you can go through and install. And if I remember correctly, the web app password was the one that allowed you to share passwords between accounts on your Nextcloud system if you want to be able to do that. So those are available. Bitwarden is flashier than the Nextcloud stuff, but the Nextcloud stuff is functional if you've already got a Nextcloud install. I use KeePass Droid on Android, but if you look in F-Droid, there's a dozen, if not more than a dozen, that can understand KeePass files. And I mentioned KeePass earlier if you're on a different desktop. And thanks to the person who created that to begin with and created a secure file format that the rest of us use, and for doing stuff ongoing. I've never used it because I'm not on a platform where it would work. But thanks to them for doing that and starting this cottage industry that I do depend on. So here's an example of what KeePass looks like, or KeePass XC when you open it up. You can create a new database. So you create a password for this. Now, one thing, if you think about it, right? I'm creating a password to get into my password database where all my passwords are. So keep it secret, keep it safe. That is one password that gives access to all of your other passwords. You need to make sure that's a decent password. You keep the file secure, and then don't write that one down on a sticky note and put it on your monitor, right? And make it a decent password. Make it fairly long, but something you can type and difficult. You can do all kinds of things. You could actually use shell snippets as your password for KeePass XC, or for KeePass X, and the XC has it as well. So in my classes where I used to teach this, I would show an example using a 10 lines out of a shell script, basically using a function out of a shell script as my password. Or passphrase. So that was pretty cool. So you can hide it in plain sight and get. Please don't do that, but you could. So one of the things I recommend when you set up a new KeePass X database is make sure trial type the password a few times to make sure you can type it fairly well, and then use it for a few times. And anytime you need to learn a password by heart, do that. Use it again. 5 minutes later, use it again, in an hour, use it again the next day a few times until you've gotten some finger memory going to help you out with that. This is the KeePass, or the XKCD I mentioned earlier for correct horse battery staple. I'm not going to leave you time to read it. Go look at that. But also in the notes I have at the end of the presentation, I have a link to XKCD Explained and their page on this. So if this is all new for you, if you're not understanding quite why this is better, go read their write-up on it. It's a pretty thorough write-up on it. All right. So I mentioned pronounceable strings. So sometimes you need to say a password. You need to say the string for some reason, right? Normally, you shouldn't be giving up your password, but there are places where you do need to be able to pronounce it. So, for instance, if it is your passphrase for the audible passphrase for a bank. My bank has a thing where I have to give them, when I call in, I have to give them a password that to verify that I am me, right? When I go through to pick up my kid from school, we've got an audible password that we can use if there's a lockdown or something like that, right? So we've got some places where I need to be able to say the phrase for them. So this is a place that needs to, where that can be useful. Pronounceable strings, they're not supposed to make sense. And as I say, they're just useful for like phone stuff or whatever. And this is where the pronunciation guides I was talking about help out. So if I looked at the string, I'm going to be like, we're somebody, what? But with the pronunciation guide, where akbiev it of edge mu, right? It sounds like I'm talking a language I don't know, but it works, right? So we've got some things that can be helpful. So again, authentication is proving that you are you. So there are some different ways that we can prove that. Basic 3 ways of doing that is something you know, so your username, your password, things like that. Something you have, so YubiKey just came up in the chat, right? A smartphone or other token for multi-factor. And then what you are, fingerprint, your DNA, facial recognition, stuff like that, right? There's a 4th element that a lot of people don't think about, so cookies, right, for web browsers. But also Verizon's the worst with this. I don't know that they're the only ones in this country at this point, but Verizon and AT&T were definitely both doing this. But they hook up a device ID to your phone if you have a phone with them. And every time you make a web request, they add that device ID to it on the network side. So you don't ever get to see it, but every site that you go to has a fingerprint for that is you coming from this phone. If you're like me and you have multiple phones, you can break it out a little bit like that. But that is a way that they can track you. And for the places that have information, have JavaScript on every site on the planet, they can then track you across multiple sites because they're seeing that device ID. So that's the 4th element. There's also a 5th element. It's a pretty good movie, but it really doesn't have anything to do with privacy. And then let's talk about those different parts. So username, random string, it works if you can. So when I'm logging into my bank, I have to tell, so this is the lawyer part, right? I have to, by law, I'm pretty certain I have to give them my actual identity that the government recognizes, right? But my username doesn't have to be that. My username can be whatever. Same thing for my utilities and stuff like that. So I can use random strings. And I do that for websites where I'm shopping and stuff, places. I give them random strings. There's no need for them to be able to read it. There's no need for me to be able to read it. It can be whatever, right? If you're doing social media or something that's going to be public facing a little bit, then you need a handle or something that people recognize. So in the free software community, I've been using Flox Advocate for a while. I use Lufthansa. So those are things I can use that people recognize. If I use the name that was on my ID, people might not recognize it because I don't use it anywhere publicly. So use the thing that seems to work for the place that you're going through and setting up. Now for email addresses, I've mentioned multiple times, use a different email address for every site. I do. I use a different email address for every site. If I'm doing something somewhere and I need to give them an email address, I just make one up on the fly and give it to them, right? I don't even think about it. And that way I can track who it's coming from. And I might not be able to track it back to who I gave that email address to, but I will be able to I filter those if I start getting spam or other problems coming to that email address. And I can then isolate each individual group that way. The way I do that is using sub-addressing. If you run your own domain, or if you're setting something up, I actually recommend something using like a period or a dash instead, because plus is problematic because people don't pay attention to standards. But that is the one that's kind of the most common. Gmail has that, so you can use a plus. Several of the other providers do. Wikipedia has a list of sub-addressing providers and what their tokens are, so go look at that.
Can you give an example of how that works? I've heard this before.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to right now. So
okay.
What that is for an address, for a domain that supports sub-addressing. So let's again use Gmail. It's the big one out there. And if your own domain, if you got it, you have your normal email address, username at gmail.com, right? And any email that goes to that will then go to you if that's your account. Well, after the username part, whatever your username is, you can put a plus and then some random string. Now, the random string needs to be ASCII characters, so basically, English letters. Nowadays, we might be able to UTF and emojis. I don't want to think about emojis and email addresses. It's happening. I don't want to know. But there are some limitations. You can't do, for instance, 2 periods in a row in email addresses. But anything that goes after that plus before the @ gets ignored for delivery. So let's think about a regular address, right? So you've got your name at 1234 Main Street, your town, state, and zip code, right? Well, after your name, the line with your name before you get to the address, you can put, ATTN : for attention, and you put somebody else's name in there, right? Well, you could also just put a random string in the name. You don't have to do attention Barbara. You can do attention and then whatever I had on the previous day, 3QKR1, or is that an L? Again, so you could use that as your piece. And that's kind of what this is. This is that extra string. It really gets ignored for delivery, and it goes to the actual email account. But this means that I can add a random piece to my email address for every email, for every company I do business with, for everybody I order something from, for mailing lists. If you see me start posting on the mug mailing list, you'll see that because I use Verteiler, which is distribution list in German, as my email address for that. And what I recommend is whatever your token is, some random string after that, and then a dash, and then a string that makes sense to you, right? So that's easier for you to read it. But by doing this, if somebody breaks into LinkedIn and gets my account again, right? Not saying it hasn't happened today. With the Java stuff going on, they've probably been broken into a dozen times this weekend. So if somebody breaks in and gets my account information again, they will have my email address that I used for LinkedIn, but that email address does not work on any other website anywhere in the world. That's the only place it's ever been used is LinkedIn. So I don't have to worry about somebody using those credentials because the email address is different and the password is different. Now, can they spam me? Yes, they can figure this out and start sending me email. But they can't use that to break in somewhere. And even if they're like specifically going after me, and now they're like, oh, well, let's go after Hans's eBay account, right? Well, they don't know what my random string is or what I called eBay. I might not have called it eBay. I might have called it EB or the Bay of E. I don't know, whatever, right? So they have to guess the username as well when they're trying to break in and figure out what my account name is. And even if they've got lists from both, they're not gonna sort together. So I'm keeping them separate in several different ways and making it more difficult for them to use credentials from one site to break into another site, another of my accounts. And again, that's part of it. We're not making it impossible. We're making it more difficult so they go after the other 3 billion people that have accounts at that site rather than you. And then, as I said, it doesn't work so well for social media and other places where you want people to know your password and know your email address and use that to get to you. But if you can use a different email address for notifications, then this is also great for that, because by having that distinct email address, you can add filters to it to make it easier to filter things as you go in. In the end, if I could get all data that I ever look at to go through Procmail, life would be awesome. Right? I love Procmail. All right. So using sub addresses, I've pretty well gone through this. Don't you reuse the tokenized email address. I'm breaking it up so you can see the parts on different lines, but the same things I was talking about. And then, as I said, for filtering, so the reason I use eBay as an example in here, not to promote eBay, but not their fault. Both eBay and Craigslist used to have a lot of spam go out claiming to be your eBay site. I think they still do, right? my local mailing list for Plug here in Phoenix, we would get regular spam coming in saying, hey, your eBay purchase, we're having a problem. You need to log in through this link that we're giving you so you can get your thing that you bought or whatever, right? Well, if it's coming to the mailing list, obviously I didn't buy that because I didn't use my mailing list email address to buy something on eBay, right? I generally don't buy anything on eBay, so that also locks out. As far as I know, I am still getting those emails 15 years later, but I added a filter that said if it's not going to this particular eBay email address, it's not from eBay because that's the only email address that they have. So I don't have to worry about those. Those all automatically get filtered out, and I don't see them. And last time I looked was a long time ago, but I was still getting those all the time to my Plug email address, but I didn't see them because I filtered them out. So, it takes a little bit of effort to do that. So I don't do that for every email address. But once you send enough to annoy me, I go through and start adding filters. Again, I love ProcMail. All right. So cookies, as I mentioned, web browsers, we can use tokens. You can use cookies as tokens on there. Third-party cookies can track you on multiple sites. So they can see that you logged into this site now and they logged into this other site because they're using some other engine for CAPTCHA, for instance, or something like that, where they're able to run code on your computer and profile you. I recommend two add-ons. Lightbeam is a great add-on for being able to see what they're doing. I'll pick on Newegg because I'm actually a fan of Newegg because they were fighting the patent trolls. That was awesome. But oh my gosh, do they have a lot of trackers on their site? Last I looked, and I haven't been willing to look in a while, it was like 40 or 50 different trackers for different sites that are on their site. I don't see those because of UMatrix, and I'll get to that in a second, but they're there. So if you go to Newegg with some kind of tracking blocker, Ghostery, uBlock Origin, UMatrix, what have you, whatever your favorite tool is, and it disables a lot of those things, you can then go look in Lightbeam and see what your connections are. So it'll show you the site you went to and then what other sites are on there. So for instance, everybody's got a flipping Facebook information, right? So you see a link to Facebook and it's pulling stuff in. Same thing with Twitter, right? And then if you turn off your blocker and reload the page and go look at it again, for Newegg, it just explodes with all the different things it's connecting to. So you can see those connections. When I go to Newegg, I don't have that. I have Newegg and NewEggimages.com. When I allow them, I don't usually allow them until I'm ready to buy something. And I don't have the Facebook and the Twitter and all that stuff because I'm using UMatrix to block those. I'm not even making those connections. uBlock Origin is from the same guy that makes UMatrix and is still being maintained. He's stopped maintaining UMatrix. So go look at that. I found that uBlock Origin just does not provide the granularity that I like. I got to UMatrix from NoScript when Firefox made their change to the new model. NoScript wasn't available to begin with, and I found UMatrix. And as much as I love NoScript, UMatrix is just so much better, and helps me block JavaScript, XHR, cookies, all kinds of things, CSS and images if I want to. It's a really nice setup. But whatever tool you're using, block the extra stuff if you can. All right. Device ID. As I said, I mentioned this earlier. This is the Verizon case I was talking about where they stamp it on my network traffic. I don't see it. I can't stop. Well, I can't stop it. I don't use Verizon. That's the easy way to do it, that particular one. But I also don't know for certain that the provider that I'm using doesn't do that because I can't see that side of the thing. I suppose I could because I could set up a website and start looking at traffic on there. All right. So security questions and answers. So they don't need to know the actual response to the question, right? What was your grandma's name? What was your grandma's neighbor's hairdresser's pet's favorite flavor? Who cares, right? They don't need to know. So the important part about thinking about security questions and answers is to lie. Give something that can't be guessed, right? If you give them actual information, somebody else can figure out. If you give them your kid's name, what's your firstborn kid's name? What street did you grow up on? Somebody might be able to social engineer and find that. But if you just give them random stuff, there's no social engineering. I guess there was no actual connection. So give them fake information if you can. And this is an example from Mastodon. DJ is an interesting personality. Some of us follow him. So I love this quote in here. Basically, he's talking about use unique credentials for everything and make it difficult for them to track you, right? So never use the same personally identifying information twice. He's fine. All right. Now, a reminder when I'm talking about this, I'm not your lawyer. If you have concerns about this, you're like, can I lie on security questions and answers to a bank? I don't know. I do, but if you're not certain, talk to your lawyer. All right. So security questions and answers. Use random answers and random answers for everything. Use random questions if you can. Now, this is one of the examples I was talking about where pronounceable strings can help, right? Be nice. The person that's on the phone talking to you is not earning a lot of money. They have to deal with a bunch of people yelling at them for something they have nothing to do with. Be kind. Choose something they can pronounce if you can. It doesn't have to make sense, but at least make it to where you can use it conversationally, right? And this is the place to use the key value store inside the password manager. That would probably be a bad one to use. In chat, somebody posted, "You're under arrest." Yeah, that's that. Use kind words. All right, multi-factor authentication. I'm going to skip through most of this. The big thing is I recommend time-based tokens. I'm not really a fan of it hash-based, and I've finally bought YubiKeys. I haven't gotten time to start using them, so I can't say where they fit into this properly. I use my phone as my token tool, and I use time-based tokens on that, and I'll get to some examples of why. So the big thing for me for time-based tokens is the site does not need to know my phone number. They don't need to know my email address. They don't need to know my IP address. They don't need to know anything. We set this up separately, and I can use my device as a hardware token, whether that be my phone or my laptop or whatever it is I'm using. But I don't need to interact with the site in order to use that multi-factor authentication, so they don't get another data point or another 10,000 data points on me by doing that. It is time synced, so you do need to make sure your time is staying up to date, but generally we kind of want that anyway. And some places will allow you to do backup offline numbers, so you can basically say create these 20 or create these 5 or whatever you want to have, and have those as backup emergency pieces. So if you lose your phone, you can pull up a backup number out of your wallet, or that you tattooed on the back of your arm where nobody can see it. Yeah, please don't do that. But wherever you might have hidden that, so that you do have that as an option. In F-Droid, there are several free software tools that will allow you to packages that will allow you to do that for Android. I use one-time pass and OTP for that myself, but there are others. And my recommendation is just they've been working for me. I haven't done a big, huge evaluation on them. All right. So the HOTP, I don't like them. They use one code only once, and so you can get things out of sync. I've gotten locked out of work because of that, and if I need to respond to something, that really causes problems. So I have distrust of those over time. I have used them for years, and mostly they work really well. But when they don't work, while I'm on call, that sucks. So yeah. SMS requires phone number. It's not secure. I've got to post a link at the bottom of the slides that explains why it's not secure. An example of where it's not secure. It's too easy to do, unfortunately. Push notification, phone call. Again, you're giving out your phone number. I don't want to do that. I already get too many calls from Scam Likely. I don't need any more. So we don't do that. I will give I do mention here an alternative. Nextcloud has video verification they use. So this is all basically what we're doing here with Jitsi. but where you hop on a secure connection with Nextcloud and you can do voice and or video to verify the person that you're talking to. That isn't bad. You're not doing a phone call. You're doing a internet-based video call. But now you can get that verification that way if you want to do that for personal stuff. All right. Email, similar to SMS, it's not secure. Spam is better than sales calls. There are some sites I've been using that do this. Actually, I've got a work thing that we're doing where they have to send me an email before I can log in now instead of using a password. It's not bad. I still would prefer the time-based token. But from their perspective, they can't know that I'm doing the right thing. So I kind of understand that a little bit. The big thing for me is I use gray listing, so everything takes at least 5 minutes to get to me the first time. Body parts. So those are hard to change. I know I'm closer to the Mexican border than y'all are. I don't know if they have these types of services in Canada, maybe, right? Or maybe you just go up and get extra poutine and that changes your passwords or your fingerprints. Down here we can drive down to Mexico and get brand new fingerprints, but they're expensive, they're dangerous, it's problematic, and if you have to do that every 3 months because your passwords are getting compromised, it's not really a good long-term solution. So I'm kind of opposed to body parts because they don't change, and if it gets compromised, yes, the industry keeps making it more difficult for people to use fake pieces, to just take a copy of my fingerprint and make fake, silicon copies of my hand and use them. But then the people that are creating that also keep getting better at making fakes. So, I'd rather just avoid it. I don't like body parts as authentication, not for digital stuff. For in person, fine, but for the computer can talk to digits or typing. All right, birth date. Again, lie when you can. This is another place where I remind you I'm not your lawyer. Lie when you can. Unfortunately, February 31st no longer works. Up until about 15 years ago, I was born February 31st on some random year for most places that demanded that I give them birth dates. I don't run into that as much as we used to, thankfully. I think the privacy laws have got in place, have made it a little bit more difficult or made it a little bit riskier for companies to demand a birth date. There are still some that do, but I have less of that going. Again, think of the circumstances where you might or might not be able to lie about it due to circumstances. And here's a one-liner for going through and making a randomish birthday or dates between 1954 and 1999. Pins. So when we think of 4-digit pins, that's mostly what they tell us, but you can actually use 5 or 6-digit pins in many cases. Be cautious, make sure that works, test it before you depend on it for somewhere. Don't, lock yourself out of an ATM on a Friday night on a long weekend, right? Backups, make regular backups. So I have my password manager file. So if my house burns down, I lose access to everything, right? So I need to make sure I've got backups that are secure enough that I don't lose everything. So I need to have, off-site with, global climate change, maybe off-planet. So I'll put them in. I'll put them in the glove compartment of the next car that launches into space. So I need to figure out what my factors are, what I think I need to do to make sure that I've got copies of my passwords and make sure that those are secure and can't be lost by a single incident, right? I do not live in Tornado Alley or whatever, so I don't have to worry about 200 miles with the people I know might have just lost their houses and all the thumb drives I might have stashed in their houses, right? Here, I can store something in 2 streets down and be fairly certain that we're not both going to lose our house in the same week, right? So think about, again, what your circumstances are and whether or not you have access. You all have this thing I don't get. It's frozen stuff comes from the sky and it gets cold and stuff like that. We don't have that here. But, if you've got your backup at somebody else's house and then you can't get to that because there's a blizzard or something, that type of thing. Think about what are your particular circumstances in order to make sure that you have copies that you can get to if you need to in an urgency. And then also, if the place that you're doing that is online, remember that like diamonds, clouds are forever. So I talked to somebody, an SRE at one of the storage, online storage places, and he said that when you delete the data from your account, for up to 2 weeks, you can get the file restored by yourself. You can just go in and say, oh, I changed my mind, I want it back, right? So if you think that your passwords have been compromised, including the password to whatever that storage thing is, whoever got the compromise can then also go and get that old file of yours once you've deleted it, right? And then after 2 weeks, their help desk can still go through and get stuff for another 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the backup cycle. And then, on the back end, if you talk you can pretty talk your way in, up to like 3 to 6 months, they might be able to go through and restore that file. So remember that when you put it up online, that data might be available for a long period of time for people that know how to ask nicely and do stuff, or people who work inside the company. If you're worried about that as one of your part of your threat profile. So going forward, use long random strings, use sub-addressing where you can, use multi-factor authentication as much as you can. I admittedly do not do as much of that as I need to. One of the things I wanted to add to this presentation was a little bit was point out how to do multiple factors with SSH, but I didn't get time to add that. And then ask vendors to encrypt email. Unfortunately, it's not likely to succeed, but keep asking. I saw a thing recently. Think Penguin does. So if you think Penguin, if you send them a GPG key, they'll actually give you like a 2% discount because they want to be able to encrypt mail between customer and the company. That's awesome. We need more companies to do that. That's fine that you send me something that gives me an update about my account. That's awesome. Please don't do it in clear text and tell everybody where my bank is or what I've been doing at your whatever your company is. Please, ask them to encrypt. And then don't forget, please use unique credentials for every site. Again, not just your password, but all parts of the credentials where you can. And then that is the end of the main presentation. Here's some information about getting a hold of me if you want to outside of tonight. I'll look at the chat. And we can see if we have any questions. I have a couple more slides I'm going to kind of page through that say what they're at. The slides will go up on this site on lufthansa.com/talks. They'll might take a little while because, as I say, I'm busy with the Java thing. But these will go up there, so you'll be able to see them there. And I do have some extra slides if y'all have time and interest and want to go into a couple of extra ideas. All right. And so, are there any questions from the chat that went on tonight that I should address? All right. Mark wants to see. There we go. Go ahead.
So I've been foolishly using Google Chrome to save my passwords. And I did at one time, there was an extension that would let me dump all the passwords to a file, and I printed that out. Is there an easy way to convert from Chrome to KeePass?
I do not know. I don't use Chrome in general, and I definitely have never allowed my web browsers to store my passwords because it's the number one attack vector for me, right? On my computer, I'm not running services for the most part, so the main way that people can get in is through a web browser. So I've just had a distrust of that myself. So does anybody else have if you want to talk, go ahead and put it in the chat. But anybody else have a suggestion for exporting for data exfiltration? That does remind me though. So what's Google's thing called Red something? They have a data exfiltration project that was actually being sponsored by, I think, SeaGL, where it made it to where you could get your data out of a Google environment. So you might look for...
yeah, I have seen that. I have taken a dump of the Google data.
Yeah, so that might be the way to do it. Look at whatever tool they've got that way.
Thank you.
All right. So on this talk, the privacy tax is an awesome talk from Dawn that she gave at LCA last year, Linux Conf Australia, where she talks about the cost for people who have special needs, handicaps and so forth, and the things that they have to give up for privacy in order to interact with the system. And she's a great speaker. It was an amazing talk. But it's also really gets us to think about the privacy, and we think, oh, it doesn't matter if somebody sees what I was buying on eBay. Well, for other people, it is really important. So I don't have anything special, but I don't want anybody looking at what medications I'm taking. Regardless, it's my private health. So if I'm needing to buy special aids for things, I don't necessarily want that to be publicly available as well. All right. Any other questions?
Could you go more into some of the applications that you said to use? And my question is, now I have to trust the application with all my passwords.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of simple fixes for trusting the application if you're not certain about it. So, for instance, when I first tried XKCD, when I first tried KeePass XC, it wasn't available as a deb. I run Debian, and basically, if you're not in the repo, I don't run it. I like that extra. Debian developers are generally pretty competent and do a decent job. It's not foolproof, but I trust that pretty strongly and have for decades. So KeePass XC wasn't available in a Debian repo to begin with, and it looked really interesting. It was cool, and they provided their own debs so you could install it. But I hadn't gotten that verification that I like to have, right? So what I did is I created a container and installed it in the container, and then before I installed it, I locked off all network access from the container, other than to download. Or I downloaded the deb file already onto the system, locked off all outgoing network connections, and just set it up to where I could SSH in, kicking X back, right? So I could use a next tunnel, and then I would run the application off of that. You could also set up a VM that has no networking connection, and then you don't even need the X tunnel because you can do it inside the desktop for the VM. And now that application doesn't have network access, and unless it's really, really sophisticated and can break out of your VM or your container, even if it's bad, it's not going anywhere. Now, I still would say don't just go grab some random password manager off the net and go, hey, this looks interesting, and start using it. But like I say, let's say that there's a bug in KeePass XC, and you want to get a new version of it that isn't coming through your normal distros in Fedora or Arch or wherever you're getting it from, because it's been 3.5 seconds, so Arch doesn't have it yet, right? So you want to go grab that from that other source. You could then, as I say, throw that into a VM and have isolation that way. All right. Next question. Or there was two parts to that question. Did I answer both questions? Sorry about that. Did I answer both parts?
Well, to use it, to the implementation, I'm not sure how to use a password manager.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I've taken some of those slides, or taken most of those slides out. So first of all, on this page that I've got up now is a getting started guide from KeePass XC. And while I haven't read it, I'm pretty certain that it'll have information for how you get going. But basically, to get started, you install the application, you tell it to create a new file, and then there's a drop down menu that says add site, right? And it'll allow you to create a new entry. And then you can follow they're not quite prompts, but you can follow the fields that are in there. The things to store that I kind of glossed over is username, whatever username you're using for the website. It'll generate the password for you and then give you 2 copies of it as well when you're generating it. You can put the URL or whatever you need to cite. So you could say, mug if you've got an account at mug.org, right? Or you could give the URL there, so that makes it easy to copy and paste and use. You can also have notes in there. But those are the main things you need. What are the credentials, and then where are they for?
Okay. How do you? I'm not sure the mechanism for asking a question here, but I have one.
Go ahead.
Okay. There's nothing that you said that I disagree with.
Okay.
But in my work environment, we have a total population of about 20,000, of which perhaps 50 of us would be actually receptive to the things that you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real challenge working in a school district where we have to strike a balance between usability, accessibility, and very real security concerns, which are getting, school districts actually are increasingly becoming, getting attacked, ransomware attacks, that kind of thing. I almost think that, we need to look at things like password managers, but it's as though we almost have to mandate them to get true compliance. And so now we're very much concerned with scalability. We have a user base that is going to be challenged by maintaining the master password. And at the same time, it's going to be, we would have difficulty restoring them. So, there would be a lot of challenges for institute. So it seems like in the real world, the weak link is for larger organizations are the members of the organization in general. Yeah. That just seems like a very hard but very important challenge.
It is, and I actually work with that a little bit. So my spouse is a teacher, and she's not a digital native, shall we say? I'll just put it there. She's a great person, but yes, the things I do for passwords, I will never convince her to do. Right? Or at least I seriously doubt it. So I would say two things. One, you've got your tech group that has access to lots of things. You've got access to the routers, you've got access to the passwords, or the servers, and so forth. So one, make a case for having a better password protocol in place for your group to use, where you've got people who are more likely to be able to understand it and have extra need for it, right? Ideally, you would be able to do something similar to the administrators, but it is difficult to tell the principal or the CEO of your company, this is the way you're going to do things, right? It's just not, you've got limits to how much weight you can throw around, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But for your group, you can make sure you're using, good procedures, and you're being as secure as you can for the things under your group's control, right? And again, limiting the exposure of those devices. As sysadmins, we have access to everything, right? I pointed out, I was working in a large corporation at a daughter organization within the large organization, and I was in the engineering group for that large organization. I was like, at any point in time, I can walk into almost any office in this building because I can talk my way in. I didn't necessarily have access to the CEO's office, but I could have got in there at night if I wanted to. Right, so we have extra access. We need to take extra precautions, and don't abuse our access. Now, for the teachers, or any place where you've got a general user base that isn't on the technology side, that's the place for maybe a web-based system. So go through and use a commercial service and pay for the commercial service, right? Some of them might allow you to use it free. There might be some that allow a school organization to get free accounts and use it that way, right?
Yeah, we would have a budget for this. There's no question about that. So anyway.
So yeah, do that. You still can't force people to do the right thing. But you know, as I said, my spouse is not technically savvy, but the times the kids have gotten into her grade book are not because of her mistakes, right? There were mistakes that the central IT made and didn't set things up securely like they needed to. They weren't able to get into her grade book because she didn't have a decent password on it. Her passwords weren't awesome, but they were decent. Yeah. So you might find that by restricting the number of things that they have to have that are good, and by giving training and helping them year after year, you get them in position where they do have decent password stuff for the 1 or 2 passwords they needed to maintain. Well, you know, I would still say, you know, anybody for work, you're probably going to need a half dozen different passwords, because you need the password for your, you know, whatever your single sign-on is. You'll need the password for your password manager, and, you know, maybe a couple other things. So you're still getting, you know, the copy machine, whatever you need. But you can work with them to get good password hygiene for the few things they need it, and then be able to use that password vault to do the rest of their stuff.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I had a follow-up question too, but I think I'll let Victor.
Okay. Go ahead, Victor.
So in the email, we had the username,
Mm-hmm.
token, site, and then the @ symbol, and then whatever your email provider is. Where do you get that token number for that email?
I make it up.
Okay.
But that's the point where I was talking about, where you can do random strings from anywhere in the UI. When KeePass X doesn't allow me to do that. KeePass X, you can only create random strings in the password field. And in KeePass XC, I can create it anywhere. So in KeePass XC, I can pop up and say, give me an 8-character random string, and it'll just give me an 8-character random string I can then copy and paste into the field. If I'm using KeePass XC, I basically just type a couple random characters. You know, so they won't pass, you know, truly being unique, because I end up using the same characters a lot for some reason, right? And avoiding certain characters. But they're, you know, I'm not using this to hide the nuclear codes. I'm using it to have a random token and a email address that can be found in mail headers. So it's not that critical.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And somebody else had a question?
Yeah, Hans. So I just wanted to bring some awareness to the feature of the YubiKey called static password. I think it's a great idea for your master password, especially once your vault is getting kind of lengthy and you actually use it every day. Mm-hmm. You know, say you're at a conference and you're logging into your master password there, and you typed it in, and someone's seen you typing it. Maybe there's cameras everywhere. Maybe they have it on recording and someone watched it later. Yeah. With the static password, you type if you make your master password half what you memorized, and then the rest of it is a static password from the YubiKey, you can basically just plug in your YubiKey and push a button, and it spits out like 36 characters. Okay. The same 36 characters every time. So they would have to not only see what you typed, but they'd have to steal your YubiKey from you. And yeah, so that I think it's a good idea for something like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're basically adding the multi-factor within the password field.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that way you don't need something that even supports multi-factor, because you've got it. It's already in the password field that you're already using.
Yeah. I use it for my computer login as well. You know, just stuff that doesn't even have internet or anything, because. And it only works on the YubiKey 5 and above. It's just one of the extra features. You can turn one of your slots into a static password slot.
YubiKey 5 is what I bought, so I'll look at that. And that was a good point about being able to watch people type their passwords. So that's one of the things to keep in mind nowadays, especially if you're in a public place where it can be recorded. And then they have all, you know, in sneakers, they were able to do this back in the 80s, right? So with the cameras we have nowadays, they can definitely record your keystrokes and be able to figure out what you type for your passphrase. So yes, be aware of that, especially using it in public. One of the reasons I like the password managers, I left this. It's one of my favorite phrases, so I don't know why I left it out. I don't know my passwords. I've never seen 90-some% of my passwords because I generated them in the password manager. I copied and pasted them in where they are just stars. All I've ever seen is stars. They're long, right? I recommend 30 plus characters where you can. But I have never seen the passwords for most of my accounts. No idea what they are.
Does a password manager like this work on your cell phone too?
Yeah. So like I said, F-Droid has password manager, or so KeePass XC compatible applications in it, so you can install those. I think you can also get them from the Google store, but I don't, because I'd rather get the free software tool. And again, one of my top recommendation for a security application is that it be free software, so it can be audited. And even though I'm not qualified to audit it, right? I do program some, and I write shell scripts, and I've written in a couple different languages over the years. At some point, I got brackets into the kernel, right? But I'm still not qualified to go through and read code and tell you if it's secure, at least not in my free time, right? But by having free software, I've got confidence that at least somebody could have. And then I try to look at the projects I'm working at and go fund audit projects. So if you see something where they're auditing software for security, and especially if it's something you use, toss a couple bucks that direction and help that audit take place. So usability on the phone is part of evaluating a password manager. I agree. I try not to use my phone. My phone does not have access to my email. The main thing I use my phone for is a word game I play, really. But I do need to, it is my portable computing device. And especially when should we get into the after times at some point, we can travel again and do things, right? But when I travel, I do end up needing passwords, and I need to use those off the phone because I don't want to have to rip out a laptop and do stuff. So a phone or a tablet becomes the device I use for those pieces. And then also for work, I need it to be a separate device than my laptop for security reasons. I could set up a one-time password tool on my laptop, but that doesn't meet the separation requirement that we have. So I need to use my phone for that. Oh, hardware password manager. Cool. I haven't used one in a long time. Hardware password managers are great. Oh, wait, password manager. Oh, I'll have to investigate that. Multipass. I think I ran it. Is this a joke or is that a real one? I think I ran into something about that the other day. Is it from Leela? Cool. So look at Multipass and see if you like it. All right. Another question? Go ahead, Victor.
I personally like using RoboForm. I've been using it for over 15 years now. 12 years, 15 years. What's your comment on that, if you're familiar?
Using what?
RoboForm.
RoboForm. No, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
I mean, you can use it to fill out online forms. It tracks all your passwords to all your accounts.
Okay.
And all your, data. I'm able to process my taxes quickly because it has, my social security number, my bank account numbers, and everything.
It's also great if you're a web developer, especially for testing forms, because RoboForm lets you have entries for 30 form fields, so you can do lots of test cases real fast.
Okay.
Good idea. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'd like it for that. I've used Perl www mechanized for that in the past, and that's slow and arduous.
Oh yeah, it's one app that has all.
Yeah.
I was going to say when I first found out about Selenium, I seen www mechanized and I was like, oh crap, I have to learn Perl. No thanks.
So it was great. I had a thing years ago where I needed to go update a database, and even though I owned the database, I wasn't allowed to talk to the database directly because of politics. And so they gave me this thing where I needed to go grab a bunch of data off the net, expecting it to take me weeks to go through and copy pasta. I spent 2 days writing a Perl script, and I was done in the afternoon. And I was like, what do you want me to do now, boss? And he's like, I got nothing left. That was awesome.
That's awesome.
It was a corporate approved in-cubicle vacation. Most of my in-cubicle vacations were not corporate approved. All right. So what you talked about other pieces of data. This is one of the things I do. I talk about data escrow. So I didn't mention, I kind of mentioned having different files. I have a file for my personal stuff. I have a file for my phone for travel. I use a different file for work. And actually, I have multiple files for work depending on different things. So I recommend isolation. So don't put your work passwords in your personal password manager, right? Not in the file. You can use the same application, but in a different file. Part of that is, should anybody ever show up and with a subpoena and require that you show them all the passwords in your password manager, you want to make sure they're only seeing the ones that were subpoenaed, not everything, right? So you want to keep isolation. One of the things you can do with that, though, is I also use an escrow file that I have for my family. And I didn't need to do more training. This goes back to the school thing. I need to do more training with them so that I make sure they understand how to use it. But the bank account information, driver's license number, credit card information, things like that they might need. I bought a car, and I got a scan of the car company gave me a scan of the purchase agreement and the banking information. I threw those in there, right? So now I have an encrypted file store for all of the data that might be important. So should I die, I'm trying not to, but things happen. And in the last couple of years, it's really been kind of obvious for all the rest of us, right? So I put it all in one place so that should something happen, or I'm just not available, for whatever reason, then there's one place that they can go to get that information. There's also, for me, one place I can go. I needed to look up actually something about our home mortgage recently, and I'm going through my office trying to remember where I put the file, the actual documents. And I was like, wait a minute, I've got it in the password manager. Pop it open, the password manager, open it up in a PDF reader, / to search, and I found the information I needed. And I was like, that was faster than it took me to step up from my chair and walk over to the bookcase. So I can put all the things I want in there. But again, I want that a different file than where my passwords are, so that I've got isolation. Data separation for different functions. For the different conferences I help, I should have a different file for those. I don't actually for most of them, but I really should have a different file for each of those, or at least one for my conference work that's separate from my normal stuff. All right. Any other questions? All right. Oh, we got one. Go ahead, Richard.
Like to you had a link to some to having a place to go to find out about your speaking availability. Could you put that in the chat?
Yeah, you can contact me. Come back here. For the most part, I don't actually use email for these things. But we'll go back here to where am I? So these are the main ways of getting a hold of me. And actually, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat here. I'll give you my SeaGL address. I need to give you something I'll actually read. I don't. I get a lot of email and tend to ignore it. But yeah, I'm available to talk to other groups if you've got a time, as long as I can make it, right. There's time zones and all that.
Right. Okay.
So cool. Any other questions?
I'll just throw in there, if you're using the Android and KeePass, you can use a thing called Termux and install SSH on it, and then you can just SFTP your file onto your phone.
Oh, awesome.
Which makes it really easy, an easy way to, because every time you add a new password on your laptop, you're going to have to copy the file again, keep it synchronized.
Yeah. I used to just SSH into the phone. That they've made that more and more difficult. I'm now using a private Nextcloud instance to sync them. So, but yeah, that's great because you can SCP out from the phone. Cool. Gib?
Yeah.
Ever heard of dynamic passwords or seen those? So the password.
Can't hear you, Gib.
Sorry.
Yeah. So for dynamic passwords?
Yeah, dynamic passwords. So if you have a password that changes based on some criteria where you set it up to check some environmental something.
Mm-hmm. So I know of people that use those. There's a couple tools. I think I actually list a couple of my resources thing. I'm not a fan of them myself. And it might just be me not really understanding how they work. But like I know somebody that basically uses a master string and then information about the site. So his password is an MD5 sum of the master string and Citibank, or the master string and Newegg, or whatever, right? But to me, now you got to remember what you called the other place, right? And something recently, I bought some tickets for a concert, and I don't remember what expletive I called that company because I've hated them for 30 years. So I don't know what string to put in there, right? It's in my password file, so I can look it up if I want to, what I called them that day. And then also you've got the thing of what happens if you need to change it. Now, if I feel that a password on a particular site has been compromised, I now need to change the master string that I'm using in order to talk to that site. So I end up with different master strings. But I just say, I know of people that have been using that for the entire millennia, and they're happy with it. So if that works, and you're really getting random strings at that point, because they're in most cases I know of, they're using MD5 sums or something like that. Then sure, as long as it's working for you. The other thing I would ask though is, can you also then have random other data? So you can have random email addresses that you can track and so forth. So you're not making it easy to track you across multiple sites because you're using the same email address. So, but if it works, it is much better than using the same password everywhere. Plain and simple. Way better than that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for having me in again. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Got some great questions. So that was that. As a speaker, I love it when I get some feedback. And for online stuff, that's even more important because I'm talking to a dead wall for the most part for the presentation. So thank you for doing that. And I hope you learned, got something useful. If you have follow-up questions, get a hold of me. And I'll see if I can help.